Hello and welcome to Dead End Comics. I'm your host, Brian Madman McNally.
And I'm Aaron Darkhazer Banzon.
And today we are doing the spoiler talk for The Watchmen. So this week is going to be a little bit different since we are still starting off. We're not going to have any input in the first half from the audience, but we're going to record the second half instead next week. And hopefully I'll be on track to do this on a more regular weekly basis. So first off, this has always kind of interested me in The Watchmen. This has always interested me, this one particular panel in the past few years. It's actually in the first chapter on page 23. It's the last panel in which you see Dr. Manhattan smiling after Laurie makes plans to go out to dinner with Dan Dryberg. And so to me, because when you take into context how Dr. Manhattan sees time simultaneously, it kind of starts to make you think, like, was he being happy for Laurie? Like, did he recognize that, like, this was the onset of her leaving him and going with Dryberg? Was this like this one moment where he wasn't a puppet on the strings?
Yeah, it's just like it makes you think about like what did Dr. Manhattan really need Laurie, or like did he just want the best for Laurie, or what? Like, and then Dan Dryberg, pretty decent, pretty decent guy.
Yeah, of all the guys to lose your girlfriend to.
Yeah, it's him.
Yeah, it's like it could be worse.
Well, yeah, it could always be worse.
Let's see. So but that's something I always thought was interesting. And is there any other spoilers that you really want to get into?
Ooh, the whole conspiracy with this mass killer.
Obviously, I have to get into that. It? So let's just jump into that. It's Ozymandias. Well, actually, there kind of is no mass killer. It's just like, so it gets a little complicated. So basically, like, so Ozymandias, he heard it from Rorschach, and he's like, yeah, I guess I might as well feed into Rorschach's lunacy here. And so he goes, he just runs with it. And, so he runs with it. And basically he plants a false assassination attempt on his own life.
Yeah, get him off the trail, but, also, like, to mess with Rorschach. Yeah. As insane as he is. Just have his fun with him.
Yeah, and then that also leads into the other conspiracy too, with like the artists on the island. You find out they're creating this giant squid.
Yeah, a squid, an alien squid.
Yeah, and that actually kind of runs into where my problem is with the Watchmen.
Oh,
and I mentioned this in the last episode when we did the spoiler-free review of the Watchmen. So this element that kind of comes out of nowhere is the idea that there are psychics in the world of the Watchmen, and how that's where they got the brain for the squid. It was, I believe, it was cloned from the brain of a psychic who had died young.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and it was this weird thing to me. If you read the interludes in between the chapters, it is at one point brought up like this in a newspaper article, this idea that like all these important people seem to be dying across the world, or
they're missing.
Yeah, they've gone missing. Yeah, like the author of the pirate comics and stuff like that. But to me, it's like especially given that like none of the Watchmen aside from Dr. Manhattan have superpowers. It's kind of weird that like this whole idea of there being psychics, it feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, it really does. Like, Dr. Manhattan is the only one with actual powers, and then like there's also psychics in the world. I'm like, oh, okay, that's like, yeah, especially the use of psychics' brains for that squid monster alien thing.
Yeah, I feel like they could have just said like, yeah, the shockwave of it coming to New York what would have killed everyone,
Yeah.
And this is actually something that I feel was handled better in the movie.
Oh, yeah. The whole conspiracy thing about, peace in the world, saving the world. Yeah, I think it really worked out way better in the movie.
Well, it's I'm referring more to like how the idea that it was they painted Dr. Manhattan as the villain in the conspiracy.
Yeah, instead of some sort of alien invasion, even though like I think maybe Alan Moore kind of took some inspiration from when Ronald Reagan said, "Oh, the only way to unite the whole world is if aliens invaded," which, yeah, I guess it's believable, but like I just think that whole squid thing was kind of weird because, you know, I watched The Watchmen before actually reading the motion comic, so.
Yeah, to me it really just comes down to the psychic. Like, I feel like if you'd cut that aspect out and just said like they'd made the squid itself psychic or something like that, just through genetic modification, like, it'd still be ridiculous, but yeah, to me it's just always been kind of this awkward thing that comes in out of nowhere. And even reading the interludes, which is something I hadn't done in years since the first time I read The Watchmen, and all of my subsequent readings of The Watchmen, I always kind of just skip over them.
Yeah. They seem kind of unimportant, but they're still important for the context of the story.
Yeah, and even with that context, it still feels like, it always came out of nowhere. And so when I was in middle school, I was really unsure on how I felt about it, but as I matured and read it more times over the years, I just kind of felt like, it doesn't really fit.
Yeah, like you said, like sometimes it just comes out of nowhere, but I try to like appreciate even that little things with those kind of pauses you could say, but like I appreciate like the interludes.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to talk about too in the spoiler thing, we didn't talk about it too much in the spoiler-free review, was also the Black Freighter comic, the comic within the comic.
Yeah. Oh man.
And so, did you catch how it ties into Ozymandias' story?
At first I was like, what the heck is this? This is kind of weird and confusing, and then like just some crazy guy going on, and then to this day I still think about it. Like, okay, how does this really tie into the whole story? And a lot of times when I think about it, I'm so confused, but I guess it's...
So I'll actually tell you how it ties in. Yeah. So one thing I will say first off is that a lot of people think that who have caught it thinks that it only ties into Ozymandias, but really when you're reading it in the context of when it happens, it oftentimes is actually reflective of multiple characters within the story, even outside of the core group of characters. Like, there's at one point where it's actually kind of directly paralleling the life of the guy who runs the newspaper stand.
Yeah.
But then also, the big thing though where it ties into the Watchmen is that Ozymandias tells Dr. Manhattan before he leaves to space to create new life. He tells him, like, I'm having these dreams of there's a ship and it's unimportant. Right, and essentially he's dreaming that he's the main character of the Black Freighter.
Yeah.
And obviously that whole thing in the Black Freighter, the freighter itself is an allegory for hell.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, you could even see it with the imagery, like the illustrator tried to portray it in. But you actually bring up an important point, that it's not just about Ozymandias when it comes to Black Freighter. It's about each and every one of the characters, especially when it comes to their perspective. And I actually thought of it that way instead of Ozymandias, and I try to fit in the whole story as a whole. So,
yeah, I also like too the how it feels. The art in that feels very distinct.
Yeah, it is
from the rest of the Watchmen. Yeah, and also too, it has that classic, I believe it's called double printed style with the dots.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, so what other things? Oh, another moment I wanted to talk about as well was in chapter 11, just the final moment as the giant squid is arriving in New York. You see the two characters, the kid who's reading the comic book and the guy who runs the newspaper stand. You see them kind of, these two people who, even though they see each other every day, they don't really connect to one another.
Yeah.
But in that final moment, they're embracing each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like we're all we've got is each other in this moment right now, as we're meeting the end.
Yeah. Like, it really does show you, like, oh, like, you take every day for granted, but then, like, when you're almost there, you know, almost at the end, like, you try to find someone you could be with, you know? Like, you're that desperate. Like, even with someone that you just, you know, kind of ignored, because that kid was just ignoring the newspaper guy the whole time. He just wanted to read his comic.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there are just so many other great moments as we get to the end of The Watchmen as well.
Yeah, all at the end. Like, if you can't get through the beginning, like, okay, it's all worth it in the end.
Yeah. Some of the other moments, too, I wanted to spoil that are just really cool are, like, the entire jailbreak scene and his whole thing with Big Figure.
Oh, man. Rorschach. Yep, they were all stuck in there with you.
By the way, too, here's another fun fact. Did you know that whole thing with the him reading the story about the girl where like she was being murdered and everyone just kind of watched?
Yeah, what about it?
That actually happened in real life. That was a real person.
Well, Alan Moore, you did another one up on everybody. So
yeah, that was actually something I didn't know about until so this is a funny story. I always thought that part of The Watchmen was just another fictional part until my psychology class
brought it up.
Yeah, it was brought up just in the context of essentially the reason why they believe no one ever called the cops is because when everyone saw how many other people were watching, people had assumed that someone would call the cops.
Yeah, but in reality, nobody called the cops.
Yeah. So I thought that was like another great moment to tie back into The Watchmen. Next time we need to do a list of spoilers. Like we need to write this out.
Yeah, we do.
But another big revelation to talk about as well was the Laurie Specchik, her father being the comedian.
Ooh, what a twist! What a twist for Laurie. I'm sorry, Laurie.
Yeah. So what did you think? What did you think of that? Because that's actually fairly controversial, especially in more recent years.
Mm-hmm. I could believe it. Like, and then I think it's really relevant too because, like, especially for Laurie, like she had this perceived notion about the comedian, like him being a horrible person because he tried to rape her mother, but in reality, he was the actual her father. So, and then it really just changed her perspective, and then probably also changed her view on life. So it's that kind of life-changing moment. So like I'm fine with it. I'm fine with comedian being her father because I just think that, you know, it just shows like a life-changing moment.
Yeah, it's been kind of controversial, especially in more recent years, just because of the whole idea that she would just kind of have sex with this person who at one point had raped her.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, early on too, we kind of see that she has this forgiveness of the comedian from I believe it was in the second chapter when we have his funeral. Yeah, from the second chapter, when Laurie goes to California, like we kind of see that it is somewhat odd that she would just be so forgiving of someone who'd raped her. But at the same time too, I mean, I also liked the context that, like, you know, I think it's summed up well when she tells Laurie, "What, do you expect me to just curl up in a ball and whimper for 40 years?"
I know, right? Like, you also bring up an important point too about, you know, forgiveness. Like, even though rape is a horrible, violent act, there's still, you know, kind of some hope in there, you know?
Yeah. I don't know about hope, but more...
Yeah, not hope, but, you know...
But like more in the ability... Yeah, more in the ability for her to move on. But
just move on.
Yeah, but also, like I said, it makes you kind of rethink that moment of, like, why did she move on?
Ooh.
But I also like, too, something else is in the last scene between Laurie and her mother is that she's about to explain why she did it, and Laurie kind of cuts her off, and it's this thing where I feel like Alan Moore kind of left it up to the audience to decide.
Yeah.
But it's also this kind of moment too, I think, that also just reminds us about how complicated people and life in general is.
Yeah. Watchmen is very complicated, people. Like Alan Moore knew that, and he wants us to actually think.
Yeah. Any other spoilers you want to talk about?
So, yeah, another spoiler. Like, well, we already talked about the conspiracy a bit, but I kind of want to delve into it more, and how like Rorschach was always like, always doubted about this whole mass killer thing, even though it wasn't necessarily a mass killer. But like, it turns out the crazy conspiracy guy, the insane conspiracy guy, which is Rorschach, turned out to be right all along, but he never knew it was Ozymandias, probably the most dangerous man. Well, Dr. Manhattan kind of is a man, but, Ozymandias is like the most dangerous one out of all of them. So, like, and then of course it would be the former hero that, everybody looked up to, the millionaire, right? Not a billionaire.
Yeah.
Yeah, the millionaire that would actually have this whole conspiracy just to, have peace in the world, because, at that time in the 80s, the Soviet Union, United States governments, they were really much at odds, and there was threats of nuclear war, and of course with Ozymandias, he had good intentions, but, he wanted to kill millions of people, and that is really a dilemma, especially with that squid monster. Like, he actually killed millions of people in New York, right?
Yeah, so this actually gets into I think we should probably talk about this as well. Another common debate I often hear about the Watchmen is who is right in the final moments. Was it Dr. Manhattan for killing Rorschach, or was it Rorschach for wanting to tell the truth? Because I'll be honest, I'm a big believer in the truth. I'm not.
Yeah.
This is just me personally. Like, I'm not a fan of governments hiding secrets from their people and whatnot.
Me too. We're on the same boat on that.
Okay. Because that is, some people think like, no. It's already been done. You can't take it back. He should have killed Rorschach, and I'm more on the part of like, no, he shouldn't have.
Yeah, like even though it's already been done, like, can't reverse time and all that, but yeah, I think the truth should be out there, even though there will be unintended consequences if the truth does get out there, as we see in a sequel. But we could talk about that later.
Yeah. Something else too. Another common thing to talk about is ignoring Doomsday Clock. What do you think, without that context of Doomsday Clock? Okay. What do you think happened after the Watchmen?
Oh man. Well, Rorschach's journal does get in the hand of the press. So, and then of course, what was the guy's name that actually got the journal?
I can't remember, but he's I believe he was the head of the New Frontiersmen.
Yeah. And then of course the guy that always constantly getting the burgers and all that. Like okay, like, oh, it's up to you, like the world.
I always took that character as being like kind of a parody of a Wally West.
Oh,
because he even had like the kind of same red hair.
Yeah, ginger, but kind of a bigger version. But anyway, he got in his hands, and then like, okay, the head newspaper guy, I'll do whatever you want, get it from the crank file. Like, the world's at peace, there's nothing to write about. And then like, yeah, I understand that, get it from the crank file. And then okay, without the context of Doomsday Clock, I'm just gonna assume that Rorschach's journal gets published. And then, of course, Ozymandias is pretty much president of the entire world at that point, because he's savior of the world. He's gonna save the human race.
I don't think he becomes so much a president. To me,
okay,
at least,
the way I always, like a figurehead.
Yeah, the way I always interpreted it, he's more like kind of a one man shadow council.
Yeah, pretty much. Like he won't be like the official head, but he's
not gonna be like he's not gonna be the face of world peace.
Yeah, he's more like a like a deeper level kind of thing. But anyway, of course, him pulling the strings in the world governments, for the sake of peace, he'll probably try to suppress the publishing of Rorschach's journal, but I think it'll still be out there, but even though like most of the press will be like, oh, that's a crazy conspiracy theory, Rorschach was an insane lunatic, blah blah blah, but I think it'll still get out there, more people will believe it, and then probably Ozymandias everlasting peace will probably, backfire.
Yeah, that's always kind of what I felt like Alan Moore was hinting at with that ending there. That like it's nothing ever lasts. Let me check here. What was it what Dr. Manhattan told? Yeah, he says, in the end, nothing ends, Adrian. Nothing ever ends.
Yeah,
which makes you wonder, what exactly was he talking about there? Was he talking about the conflict? Was it?
Mm-hmm.
But something else too, though, I think is kind of funny when you think of Rorschach's journal in the context of the modern era. I kind of feel like what would actually happen at this point would be like, yeah, it gets published, and then people just kind of don't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like it appears on Reddit.
Reddit,
yeah.
Reddit, 4chan, all the forums
yeah.
out there.
Yeah, it appears on that, and then it ends up as a video on all-time conspiracies.
Mm-hmm. And then like more people are watching it and then starting to believe it, and then people actually do their own investigations and all that, and then it's just gonna become a bigger white lie for Ozymandias.
Yeah.
So and then it'll just definitely backfire. That's what I think, though.
Yeah. No. Something else that I wanted to touch on really quick, though, is that my whole thought, though, with Seymour being a parody of
that's his name.
Yeah, Seymour. That's the dumb fat guy. Him being a parody of Wally West. It has kind of become funnier and funnier over time. When you think of, like, if you've read some of the more recent Superman comics where, like, they try to make Wally a badass.
Wait, are we talking about Wally West or Jimmy Olsen?
Who is Wally West?
Wally West is Kid Flash.
I'm gonna have to go and read.
Oh my gosh! Okay.
Or I could just leave in my.
No, just leave it. So like we could put it on the record. Okay, Jimmy Olsen.
Jimmy Olsen.
I was like thinking, okay, Wally West because he's ginger. But okay, original Wally West.
All the ginger comic book characters look the same to me. I don't know. Is he?
Yeah, Jimmy Olsen. I
don't know. For all, it's amazing. I didn't say Black Widow.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's Marvel, so we're really talking about DC stuff right now.
Okay, Jimmy Olsen. Him
Jeez.
being a parody of Jimmy Olsen. That should tell you how long it's been since I read a Superman comic.
Oh man!
But him being a parody of Jimmy Olsen has only become funnier and funnier over time as they've tried to make Jimmy more of a badass. Like, I remember trying to give the Superman Earth 2 comic book a try, and it's there's a thing about how, like, Jimmy Olsen, like, he went under a car that was flipping over or something like that.
What the heck?
I don't know, but, like, he got really close to the action. It's like, and just other stuff like that too. Like, he's a badass photographer. It's like, really.
Oh yeah, and how Jimmy Olsen gets killed in Batman v Superman.
I did not know this. Explain this to me.
Well, because the CIA operative with Lois in Batman v Superman in the beginning, somewhere in Africa, that was Jimmy Olsen, that photographer.
I didn't realize that.
That was actually Jimmy Olsen.
Huh.
Yeah, I know. Like, as controversial as that movie is, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. But okay, I digress. But yeah, Seymour is officially a hero for putting out the truth. So, and then Ozymandias' peace will not be everlasting. So nothing ever ends. There's going to be conflict again. They were lied to. So, yeah.
I can't think of a better place to end the episode than saying Seymour was the true hero of the Watchmen.
Yes, he is. He's the Wally West. I mean, the Jimmy Olsen.
All right, so we'll be back with part 2 later. So we're back with the second part of the Watchmen spoiler discussion. And today I have the emails. So the first thing to just get out of the way here, full disclosure, all the people who have sent in these emails are friends of mine who I asked, if they could do a favor for me, because going forward, we're probably not really going to be receiving very many emails for these if you're listening to these and going to the backlog.
Mm-hmm.
The Watchmen being as well known as it is, I did know some people who'd read it, and so I reached out to them and asked them if they could send me some emails as a topic for discussion. And so this first one comes from my good friend Adam Robertson. And Adam writes, Alan Moore's Watchmen came out during a rather unique era in comic books. It was the beginning of what we call the modern age of comics. It was published in 1986, a year after Crisis on Infinite Earths storyline changed DC's overall direction, and came out the same year as Frank Miller's groundbreaking Dark Knight Returns. So I know the Dark Knight Returns connection. I had not known about the Crisis on Infinite Earths connection there.
Wow.
Moving forward with Adam's email, Watchmen was meant to be a deconstruction not only of superheroes but also of the comic book medium as a whole, as it explores the idea of branch storytelling with different perspectives from different protagonists, as well as creating stories within that world that provide extra context, such as Tales from the Black Freighter comic, read by two characters telling a story parallel to the events of the actions in the main story, as well as excerpts from the character Hollis Mason's The Original Night Owl novel Under the Hood, to provide a context of how the world of superheroes could exist within the context of the year the comic takes place in, with themes such as racism, sexuality, psychology, and conspiracy, among many others. Watchmen continues to be a very important and very relevant piece of literature, not only for its time, but also continues to have themes that are still explored with modern context. So much so that DC has started using the themes and characters of the Watchmen in their current DC Rebirth storyline, Doomsday Clock.
Of course, Doomsday Clock had to be mentioned.
Yeah, so one thing that is kind of funny is just how, these characters, they have kind of come back into being relevant, especially after the movie had come out. Mm-hmm. You know, even despite that movie's mixed criticism, it still became something. You know, it still became a part of pop culture.
Yes, it has.
And certainly, it seemed like it took DC a while to capitalize on the resurgence of the Watchmen from the movie, but you know, eventually they did put out those before Watchmen comics, and now the Doomsday Clock miniseries.
So yeah, Adam brought up some pretty important points how it's still relevant, and the deconstruction of not only superheroes and comic books in general, but also deconstruction in general. I think it's really important, and mainly because what intrigues me about the Watchmen is the deconstruction itself, because I'm a political philosophy nerd and a political theory nerd. So that's what I really appreciate about the Watchmen, and actually Zack Snyder's superhero movies as well. And these themes are very relevant even to this day, because politics will remain relevant for like the rest of our lives and forever on. And I'm just glad he mentioned Doomsday Clock, because I'm really enjoying Doomsday Clock.
Yeah. Well, another thing he also mentioned, too, is how Watchmen is often also associated with The Dark Knight Returns, which is also, in its own ways, a deconstruction of superhero comics, although that is more specifically a deconstruction of the Batman character.
Yeah.
Whereas Watchmen is a deconstruction of comic books as a whole. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an important point, too, because even after Crisis on Infinite Earths like changed the whole dynamic, it was still mainly pretty much not really simplistic, but it was just a superhero story. Well, multiple superheroes. But while Watchmen was just, you know, doing its own thing with Alan Moore, you know. Dark Knight Returns, yeah, you mentioned that it's just pretty much just Batman, but I think that's an important deconstruction as well, because it's kind of a different take on Batman, you know, in its older years.
Yeah, and personally for me, I always felt that Watchmen was the stronger of those two books.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, no, for many reasons, for many different reasons. One, just being that the Watchmen didn't really require having any prior knowledge of these characters, whereas in Dark Knight Returns, it did require, you know, at least some of the basics of Batman, you know, like his who Harvey Dent is and his relation to Bruce Wayne and Batman, as well as like the knowing who the Joker character is. Whereas, you know, the Watchmen stood on its own entirely.
Yeah, they're all original characters created by Alan Moore. And Adam also brings up a good point about the different protagonists and different perspectives. And I remember, as we mentioned in our previous review, that Watchmen is pretty much, well, you see Watchmen is meant to start a discussion and conversation, and I agree with that, because with the different perspectives and viewpoints of the different protagonists, I think it is important to have a conversation,
So before moving on to the next email, I just wanted to give a shout out to my friend Adam, who helped me out, in these early days by just giving him a quick plug for his photography. I met Adam in a photography class, and he does a lot of really great cosplay photography, which is, obviously comics have had a profound effect on cosplay in America.
Yes, it has.
This next mail comes from my friend Andrew. I'll not be giving his last name as unlike my friend Adam, he's not trying to promote himself. Let's see. So my friend Andrew writes, aside from being an incredibly influential book for comics, one of the strongest suits of The Watchmen is its ability to draw in a readership that would never touch comics otherwise. I'm not certain if Alan Moore wrote the book as a showcase of comics as a medium, but it certainly works as one. If not for the attention from an outside readership, I doubt it would have the reputation it does today. So now that's also kind of relevant too, because The Watchmen is often noted as being one of the few, I think it's the only graphic novel put up on the New York list of 100 greatest novels of all time.
Yeah.
Or of the century, I believe it was.
Yeah, I think that is the case.
Yeah, and as also, too, The Watchmen is also often has been handed out in a required reading in certain literary courses as well, from what I've heard. I know my friend Ryan, he did actually have to read The Watchmen for one of his college courses.
I wish I had a college course like that, but oh well. I just read political theory books.
I know. I wish I had a course where I had to read The Watchmen, even if it's only a small part of the class. It's like I just know instant A.
Wow. Wow. You should just.
I've spent all this time. I've spent like so many years rereading and thinking about The Watchmen that it's like if I get anything less than like a 95%. It's just, it's done for me. It's over. I don't even know why I would be doing this podcast.
That sounds so Asian of you.
But let's talk about this idea that it is this book that people outside of normal comics can read, and this is also relevant to the show because. Watchmen is one of the two books I cite as being the reason why I wanted to start this podcast in the first place.
Yeah. What was the other book?
Fun Home.
Okay.
The book we're reading next week. I actually had not mentioned that to you.
Yeah, you didn't mention that. Now you mention it. Wait for next week, guys. But anyway, it's not just some cheesy superhero comic book. No offense, Superman, I love you, but it's not just some cheesy Boy Scout comic book or like some brooding Batman comic book. It's really a complex superhero comic book, and it's not mainstream. It's more like, a cult classic, but now it's kind of, in the pop culture sphere, but it's very popular, not only for the superhero nerds, but also for people in general, and also for all those people that really are deep thinkers like myself.
Yeah, something also relevant too. This kind of ties back into some of the stuff that Adam was talking about in his email. Just how influential this book was. That this is also kind of relevant in its era, and that was kind of when comics had been transitioning from this thing that had been seen more as a medium for children and more into a medium for like adults and teens, which is kind of where it's been at right now.
Yeah.
There are, if you go into your local comic book shop, you'd be hard pressed to find very many comics that are suitable for children. They are there. It's just
not
the vast majority of comics not for kids.
Yeah, not anymore. Sorry, kids, but like all the people that grew up reading comics, like they're still reading comics, and Watchmen is very like mature. Like I said, it makes you think, and like children probably won't really understand its ideas unless they're like really smart and really think. But yeah, it's not really for kids, and that does bring up a good point too, because actually Batman Damned released from DC's Black Print or something, and it showed Batman's what.
Yeah, no, and so Watchmen, I feel like it also had an influence on other stories that preceded it as well. Like, I can definitely feel the Watchmen influence in something like Superman the Red Sun, which is one of which is one of the few Superman comics. If possibly, I think it might be the only. No, I read a few different trade paperbacks that weren't very memorable for Superman.
No offense taken if you say no offense, but yeah, I could see like a different take on Superman, an alternate take on Superman, like how Watchmen is pretty much an alternate take on superheroes in general. So that's what I really appreciate about it too. That's why I love Man of Steel.
Yeah, and it's another comic book that at some point we're going to get to in the more distant future when we start doing some of the longer running series of comics. Which, by the way, all great comics have a dead end.
Yes, they do.
A comic that I feel its influence in is the Boys by Garth Ennis, which I had mentioned in the initial review as well. And The Boys, for those of you who don't know, is a comic that is essentially like, it kind of asks this question, like, what if superheroes existed in a world where, like, all superheroes were these kind of outrageous Lindsay Lohan celebrities? You know, I'm talking about, like, the outrageous era of Lindsay Lohan.
Jeez. Kind of sounds a bit like My Hero Academia, but okay.
Even more outrageous than that.
Yeah, I could see it. Lindsay Lohan, she's pretty outrageous, especially back then.
Yeah, just the worst. You know, if superheroes were the absolute worst of celebrity culture.
Oh man.
Yeah, no, just that also too. It's like I feel the influence of the Watchmen in The Boys, even though The Boys takes a very different direction from where the Watchmen went.
Mm-hmm.
So the final piece comes from this person is actually my cousin, my step cousin, Chris writes. So and I should also mention too, I don't think he fully understood what I was asking for, like at least in the way that I wanted him to have the format of the email in. So I've slightly trimmed this. So the first thing that pops into my head is that I liked the change of the plot from the comic book to the movie. In the movie, Ozymandias frames Dr. Manhattan at the end. Oh wait, that's right. I was going to skip this paragraph.
Oh, fail. Don't cut it off.
Sorry, Chris. We're trying to focus more on just the book itself and less comparisons to the movies. That I will bring this back up though. When at some point I would like to do a review and comparison with the Ultimate Cut.
I would love that.
Which I've not seen yet.
And I just saw the Ultimate Cut.
Yeah. So anyway, so here we go. Let's see. I think it's interesting how the story designates Ozymandias as more liberal, and he's a pretty good guy who does bad things to help society, and Rorschach is overwhelmingly conservative, and he is generally a bad person but does good things to help society. Kind of an interesting dynamic between these two characters. I've never really thought of before now, and maybe you can do something with that. I guess if you want to walk on thin ice about something dangerous like politics, which isn't always a wise thing to do, but I am not a very wise person.
Yeah, you're not. No offense. I'm just kidding.
None taken. No, so this also kind of gets more relevant and into something that Aaron didn't really get to experience since he watched the motion comic rather than reading the actual book.
Yeah, sorry.
One of the excerpts is from an article in the fictional newspaper The Nova Express, in which this character who is actually the person who, if you recall, Aaron, he's the guy during the Dr. Manhattan interview. When they're taking questions from the press, he's the one who's really pressing Dr. Manhattan about
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, so it's that guy. It's an article by that guy where he's hanging out with Ozymandias at his Arctic retreat.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing an interview with him, and so I thought that what Chris's response to me made me really think of was that excerpt from the Nova Express. And at one point, he even asks what Ozymandias thinks of his other fellow adventurers being more conservative than he is, and he's, even this writer in this newspaper, he's even constantly referring to himself and Ozymandias as being more left leaning.
Yeah, this political dynamic, I think it really is relevant for today because politics is just, woo, it's really something in this day and age. But that is an interesting thing to point out that Ozymandias, he's more quote unquote liberal, but does bad things for the good society, while Rorschach is quote unquote conservative, but does bad things. I mean, good things for the good society, even though he's like very hardcore, like Batman kills kind of person.
Yeah, and I really didn't realize until I was much older just how conservative Rorschach is.
Yeah, he's like very hard line, if you ask me.
Yeah, okay, one of the like things that I remember, just I don't remember when exactly I read it and it struck me. I just remembered that it was kind of a delayed response, but his line to Laurie Svechik concerning the comedian, where he says, it's not my business to question. It's not my place to question the moral lapse of men who serve their country. To which then Laurie responds with, rape, questions him saying rape is a moral lapse. And yeah, it's like the gravity of that part never struck me until years later. I think I might have been maybe somewhere in the 18 to 20 range when I finally realized just how powerful that one moment is and how much it says about those two characters and their relationship, and also how Laurie and the comedian feel about about the comedian.
Yeah, that really does show like Rorschach, is not that hard line as you would think, but still pretty hard line in most of his things. And also I want to point out like Ozymandias, like his liberal ideas seem a bit more progressive to me because he's trying to reach that utopia of peace.
Yeah, something else too that actually just that I just remembered after mentioning that as well. I forgot to mention this in the first half of the spoiler review, but in another one of the interludes between the chapters, you read the report on Rorschach's case, and you also read there is a short essay that he wrote while he was in school where he talks about his home life, and he doesn't say much about his mother, but he goes on, the idea being that this is a very young child version of Rorschach.
Mm-hmm.
But he goes on to talk about like what he imagines his father would be like. And he talks about how, I think my father was a soldier and a patriot and stuff like that. And he imagines that he served his country. And it wasn't really until I'd read that in my last reading of The Watchmen that I realized, like, I kind of get the impression that he maybe sees the comedian
as kind of a father figure.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like in a lot of ways, he lines up with what Rorschach imagines his own father to be.
Yeah, he's kind of has this like fantasy about his father when in reality is probably just some guy that just wanted something.
Yeah, but also too like just how the comedian fits in a lot of like how he was a patriot.
Mm-hmm.
Or a veteran, having served in Vietnam, and also how he was more conservative. And it is mentioned that like part of the reason why Rorschach's father left, at least from what his mother told him, was that they got into some argument about a politician.
Of course, politics and divorce. Oh man, what a disaster. But anyway, I think that also brings up a good point about how the comedian like really served his country, and how Rorschach, like, he's actually defying the vigilante bill, the superhero bill, and like he's technically a criminal, freaking fugitive from the U.S. government. So that is actually an interesting thing to point out too. Yeah. Like, even though he's quote unquote a hardline conservative, he's actually a fugitive from the government, and he doesn't trust the government. Like, really keeping tabs on him and he's just being a vigilante willingly instead of just like giving it up.
As well, this also goes back into what Adam wrote in his email, in its connection to the Dark Knight Returns. There's a line in which Batman says to Superman, "We've always been criminals,"
mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny how, in a lot of ways, Rorschach embodies that idea that Bruce Wayne has. That we're always we do these things because somebody has to, whether it's against the law or not.
Yeah. So and Watchmen really does show you that it's not just like a two-sided thing. Like political ideas and politics is very complicated as it is, and it goes in various directions instead of just two directions.
Yeah, and that's something else I also really like about the way that Alan Moore wrote the characters, is that he never really writes any one character as being definitively right or definitively wrong.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, one thing I will say is that for as much as I would disagree with Rorschach politically,
mm-hmm.
I ultimately, and I did mention this earlier in the first half of the review, that ultimately I do agree with Rorschach's notion that the truth should be out there.
Yeah.
And that they shouldn't keep this secret.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you on that. And, like, I'm politically leaning. Like, I lean a bit more towards the right. But I do appreciate that Alan Moore is like, okay, this is starting a conversation because all sides, and I mean all sides, not just both sides, all sides, actually do bring up their good points, and we should have a discussion about it instead of, like, demonizing just one side or the other,
Yeah. So join us back next week for our review of Fun Home, a family tragic comic by Alison Bechdel. And following that and the spoiler discussion for Fun Home, we'll be going into Exit Stage Left, the Snagglepuss Chronicles.
You just had to do the voice, huh?
Yeah, by Mark Russell. So I wanted to give a brief apology to my friend Adam. He wanted me to plug his photography, and I did, but I completely got his name wrong. So follow Adam on Facebook and Instagram at Adam_Robinson_photography, and enjoy this hilarious outtake.
Maybe he should take pictures of my Superman cosplay or Super America cosplay. My own amalgam thing going on. Dang, I just see your face. You're just like cringing at my Super America dude. Whatever. Okay.
Moving on from this awkward conversation.
Thanks, Adam.
You can follow Adam on Facebook and Instagram at Adam_Robin_photography on Facebook and Instagram.
I'm just gonna search him up right now.
Alright, you do that and I'll pull up the next email.
Never mind, they're all women. That's what makes big bucks. Never mind.
This entire thing is getting cut out. Let's see.